Ivy present.
Meekum present.
Let's note that all 5 are present, 4 in person, 1 by joining us by phone, and thank them for being here. We thank those that are joining us either by YouTube or in the audience here with us. We're glad to have you here with us. Let's start with a thought or a prayer from Councilmember Ince.
Just offer prayer tonight. Our Father which art in heaven, we bow our heads at the beginning of this council meeting and give thee thanks for the privilege that it is to live in this free country and in this state and in this city. We're thankful, Father, for the first responders who try to serve and protect us. We pray that thy special blessings and protections will be with them. We're thankful for the freedoms that we enjoy, thankful for the dedication of those around us to making this a better community, and pray that thy Spirit will be in this meeting this evening, that we will all be kind and considerate, be able to understand the things that are presented, and say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. If you'd all rise with me, and we'll repeat the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Right now, it's the open session portion of council, and we welcome anyone that is here to come up to either of these mics and to address any issue that may be on their mind. Try and limit your comments a couple of minutes. I will open that up to open session. If nothing, then we'll move on. We'll close the open session and we'll go on to the business of the meeting. The first thing we have on our agenda is the minute review and acceptance from 3 meetings: March 13th, a joint City Council Planning Commission meeting, a special City Council meeting, and a March 19th City Council meeting, and, for a March 19th budget training work session. Any comments, changes, any of those minutes from anyone?
Motion to approve the minutes is filed.
We have
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Those pass. Next item is our summary action part of the meeting. There is 5 items on the summary action, and I guess I would ask if there's any questions from anybody on any of those 5 items on the summary action and further discussion. If not, I would entertain a motion to accept the summary action item.
So moved. Items A through E.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Do we roll call on that? Are we okay? Lisa, want a roll call there?
Yes, if you could on the easement.
Okay. So let's do a roll call vote, starting with Councilman Ince.
Aye.
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 Passes 5-0. Thank you. Next thing is item number 3. This is a public hearing. Final subdivision plat on the Dual Creek Place subdivision. And I believe we have Cassie Younger from the staff here to present that item from staff. Cassie?
All right, thank you. Jake, if you want to pull up the plat. Perfect. You, as council members, are probably aware of this property and this subdivision. This is owned by Davis County, and previously, about a year ago, there were some negotiations between the city and the county to acquire the city, for the city to acquire some land to the north where that old detention basin is, and to the east where a trail will be maintained. So those will all be maintained as open space. And so Davis County's property on the southern half of this area is about 1 acre and is subdividing into 3 lots. So they're each about 1/3 of an acre. And so we've been going through the subdivision process for about a year now. And in conceptual and preliminary, there are very little concerns or controversy at the Planning Commission level. The city engineer is still monitoring the water on this site, so there are still just a few things to be wrapped up before the printing of the plat. But there were really no major concerns on our staff or the commission level. So, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Cassie from anyone? If not, do we have an applicant on this? Probably not. Oh, there we go. Great. Come up, introduce yourself. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Tony Thompson, Davis County Property Manager. I appreciate being here this evening and just want to give your staff and your planning commissions a very big thank you for working through this process, and the council as we've gone through this property conveyance and making this a nice spot for your city up there with the little basin that's been taken off of the inventory, and it'll be a nice little neighborhood park for your residents up there. As Cassie's indicated, we do have a 3-lot subdivision proposed there. There's a few things to wrap up prior to submitting the final linen upon approval of the council here to get the signatures and proceed forward with the recording. We want to make it a nice little spot. The lots are sufficient to bring nice residential homes into the area up there. You've got quite a few of your residents following this development and are very anxious to proceed forward and get going on it. The improvement bond and the fees have been submitted to the city and have been receipted, so we've got that part of it taken care of. And an updated title report was just delivered to your city attorney today, and appreciate her willingness to help us out through this process. So if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Or
Any questions?
I'd just like to thank the county for sticking with their 3 lots and following through with what they tentatively have agreed to, because we knew that it could change, and I appreciate working with the county. You've been very fair with the community, and I appreciate that. So do our citizens. Thank you.
thank you.
Any other questions or comments before I open it for a public hearing? If not, then this is a public hearing matter. So that this matter, anyone's welcome to come forth. And so the public hearing is now open. Always want to give people enough time since they change their minds. If nothing from the public, I will close the public hearing, and we will if there's any other further questions that you thought of in that brief moment for staff or the applicant, say it now. Otherwise, I would entertain a motion.
I will move that we approve the final subdivision plat for the Dual Creek Place subdivision at 641 East, 200 South, based on findings and conditions in the staff report.
Do we have a motion and a second? Further discussion? If no further discussion, then we'll take a roll call vote, starting with Councilwoman Ivy.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That motion passes 5-0. Thank you. All right, item number 4 on our agenda tonight. This is an ongoing issue of our Island View Park and what is taking place there. We need to consider some issues related to that, okay? And specifically on the agenda, we have consider resolution to authorize issuance of bonds for park improvements. I think another thing that we may want to discuss is, we have Lynn here from the park, so I was looking for Bruce, but we have Lynn. as far as any update that we have on Phase 2 as well, too. And any other matters the council thinks that they might want to bring up or discuss on this. So do we have any, before we talk about the financing part, do we have any further from the architect, any further information regarding Phase 2, what the costs are going to be with Phase 2, or?
I thought Bruce was going to be here. He's got that.
We can wait, see if he shows or not, Lynn.
Lynn Kennington. I don't know, I don't have the architect update. I do know that I talked to Bruce and he had talked to Steve, and we talked about some things that could be either delayed or postponed in the Phase 2 to reduce the cost. Maybe we could do them later. I know the basketball court was the first thing. The priorities were that the playground, the restroom, and the walking paths be completed as designed. And other than that, it's up to the council how much money they want to bond for, if the council wants to bond for and then the rest of it will have to come as funds become available. But I don't have the numbers. Bruce said he'd be here at 20 after, and he's probably surprised that the council's ahead of schedule, and so.
Never was foreseen.
Rude, we resemble that remark.
Oh, he's walking in. My question also was the timing. I know that the architects wanted to have it out to bid before this May 21st, and so is that going to hurt us in any way? It seems like maybe we can't avoid that unless we go with the lease option versus the bonding, but that's a month out from what the architects wanted as far as getting a bid finalized.
You're ahead of schedule.
Look at the look of shock.
I've been moseying around, turning in paperwork, thinking about time. Sorry.
It looks like you have a paper there to inform us of some information, Bruce.
Well, I just wrote down I had a discussion with G. Brown Design to ask them some questions about finishing the design for Phase 2. Is that putting too much pressure on them? Can they do a better job? What are the advantages and pros and cons? And they said it's more efficient for them to finish Phase 2 while they're working on Phase 1, that to put it aside, work on other projects, and then come back to it and refamiliarize themselves with all of the different nuances of this project. It's much more efficient for them to go ahead and finish the design work for Phase 2, whether you move right in and contract it out and do the work, or whether you hold on to that design work and then bid it out come January, February of next year, and bid it out to a new contractor, that you'll have your design work all done and you won't have to be waiting on that. So from their side of things, they said it's much more efficient and better for us if we finish the design work. I told them the situation is we're wondering if, first of all, if we're able to borrow enough money to do the Phase 2, and they had talked with Lisa, and so then they kind of looked at things. Okay, what could we do, and what are some lower priority things that we could cut out and still do the Phase 2 if we only had $500,000 or $600,000 to work with, and they came up with the idea that, hey, what if we put the construction line just at the top of the hill. We run things that make sense, like continuing, while they're running the sewer line, they continue the extra 200 feet of sewer line and run that. But they don't tear out all the sidewalk and put in a new walking path. The public won't notice that there's not a new walking path, that the existing walking path will continue to be there and be able to be used. Another big ticket item is upgrading and redoing the irrigation system on the top level. We can patch the existing system and make it work, and the public won't know that there's not a brand new system in the ground. They'll just see that the grass is green, and we can patch that and make it work, and it won't be as nice a system or the system that we'd like, but it would be something that we can make do. And then the other idea was that we put in a restroom, but we don't do a pavilion. Again, there's a small pavilion there that would stay there, and no one would miss that there's not a big new pavilion, but they would see, oh, there is a nice new restroom, and there is this 3-level awesome playground, and we now have a connecting sidewalk that connects all the levels. So they found a way that they could still do a downsized phase 2 with the lesser funds if you choose to go that way. In an effort to try to make things work on a lower budget with not as many things visible to the public, that you then would come back in later and put in your new pavilion a year or two later, or when funds are available, and then or tear out your sidewalk and put in your longer, nicer walking path all the way around the top level, and some things like that. So those are a couple of ideas. We talked about pros and cons of delaying it, and of course I came in late on the discussion, maybe you've already talked about this, but he says obvious benefits are that you don't have to pay that mobilization of that contractor for a second time. They're already there working on phase 1. He says we can get the design work done and in their hands while they're just barely starting construction of phase 1, so they can just move right into phase 2, and you're not having to have a remobilization of contractors, and while they're doing the bottom and second level of the playground, they move right up and do the top level at the same time. They don't have to remobilize contractors and playground surface installers and playground installers, and you're ordering all your playground equipment at the same time. You're not having to do separate contracts and separate orders. So there's definitely some cost savings in not having to remobilize your contractor. There's some cost savings in escalation. That's part of the reason why we're in this boat is in less than 2 years, the cost of doing phase 1 went more than 10% from what the estimates were when we had our first concept plans done. He says you'll save those escalation costs. There definitely will be. He says our estimation is somewhere between 5 and 10% to wait another year. But then there's also some benefits in delaying. And I jotted just down a couple of them. It's less risk. That doesn't tie the obligation of the RAP tax, which might free up some other priorities that you want to work on with your budget. And with more RAP tax available, one idea Brant and I talked about was you can use RAP tax to actually subsidize some of the parks operations costs, and use some of that general fund money that goes to parks operations that could be then used for other things in your budget, other demands. And those are the only 2 benefits I could find.
Mr. Mayor, sorry. If you could, Bruce, we talked about the going out for bid. Could you talk about that timing? We're going out to bid for phase 1, but what would the architects do to kind of secure phase 2 contract?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, Brant. So one of the things that they can do to make sure we maximize your dollars is a lot of times in a project to do a change order in a project costs a lot of extra money, and the contractor can really sock it to you. But if you know you're going to be doing another 200 feet of sewer, and you're going to be doing some other concrete work, and you're going to be doing another level of playground, as you're writing your bid documents, you put in that these changes will be made, and so we need a price per square foot of playground surfacing. We need a price per linear foot of sewer installation. And all of these things. So you build it in. So when you just add on another 200 feet of sewer, or you add on another 1,000 square feet of playground surface, you already have your prices set. That's what you're paying for the phase 1. You pay the same prices for phase 2, and you write your bid documents so that both the contractor and going into it that, hey, we're going to add more to this project as quick as we get our design work done. Which I think is enticing to the contractor to know that it's a little bit bigger project, more money to be made. That's a good thing, not a bad thing.
So the only other question I had on the bidding was that I understand that the designers were looking to put it out to bid more like mid-April, and now this puts it out with having to do the 30-day public comment gathering for the bond to third week in May.
Right. My dates are in May.
Did they mention anything about increased costs with the being later in the season? receiving bids, or?
You know, that's the big question mark that the designers and I talked about too, is we are all holding our breath. No one knows how
What
the bids will come in. You
right?
don't know.
But they didn't
you don't
express
know.
a serious concern with that timeline being bumped a little bit out.
No. Typically, February, March is a great time to put projects out to bid, just because contractors are coming off of winter and they're hungry for projects and want to get things lined up
Yeah.
for the construction season. The farther you get into that construction season, they already have projects lined up, but you might still find contractors that, boy, we really didn't fill our plate. We need to get another project, and so it's all a guess of how those bids will come in.
Yeah. Did you have a thought on that, Lisa?
And we can talk about this further. I thought that you could actually go out to bid, but it would just be waiting to award those bids. So it's not going to delay going out to bid, but you would just,
So
you
are
wouldn't
we-
award them until we know that the money is.
Are we still on timeline then? Are
Mm-hmm.
we still on track?
And maybe Jason can speak to that on the
Okay.
timeline of when it could
Great.
be bid. But the idea is, obviously we want to know the bid numbers as well, before we finalize the money.
bond
And
as
so
well
it's
also. Great, yeah, good point.
So if we put it out to bid, we don't have to accept it.
Exactly, yeah.
Correct.
So you say, we have the right to reject all bids, and the same thing on the bond.
Okay, I have one other question, Bruce.
Why-
I have
why
May
don't you-
16th is the target date we were looking for opening bids. And
Oh,
so then
okay.
you would award them,
So we
in
are
a
on
council
track.
meeting after that sometime, or whenever you chose, yeah.
But it's just phase one, right?
That's phase one, right, that's just phase one. They would, phase two would be more of a, use the same contractor, add on to that
Kind of a
bid,
design
yeah,
build
right,
process.
Right, right.
Okay, well, that eases my concern then, thank you.
So Bruce has given us more of an idea of what they're looking at, what the architects said, the timeline. We have Jason Birmingham here to talk to us about the bonding, the financing options, what he's found.
I have just one question before. Bruce, so to begin with, it was my understanding that there would be a chance for us to get a grant for the second. And then I understood that you came and you said, they're not giving that grant, so we don't have a chance. And then it seemed like you came back and you said, there will be some money in that for a grant. So that's my concern, is if we actually borrowed enough to do
Phase two.
phase two, are we missing out on a grant that we could be getting to help us out on that? Is there still grant money available in the next 2 years? to do
That's a really good question. I'm glad you brought that up. So there was some, it had not been funded, the grant had not been funded, but since then now it has been funded, and not only has it been funded, but it's been made to where it's an automatic funding, where it takes an act of Congress to not fund this grant. And answer your question, would we be missing out on grant money if we went ahead and finished phase two? No, because we can't apply for that grant until next spring. So we're waiting till next year anyway to apply for that grant, which then they tell you who is going to be receiving that grant approved in the fall, and then you sign that contract the next spring. So it sets you back a couple years to work on that. And we would plan on applying for that grant next spring, but not for phase two of Island View Park, but for doing phase one, or whatever, phase 8 of Community Park. Whatever phase we're on Community Park, of putting in the tennis courts and the playground and the restroom building and some of those things that we'd like to do at and replacing our playground there at the community park. So we would still take advantage of all of the grant money available. We would just be putting it into a different area, different park, and your citizens would have their park 2 or 3 years sooner, be using those playgrounds for 3 years while you're working on grant money project for another park.
So it's such a good and important question, and it's a shame to possibly lose out on grant money that we could use to Island View, but I've thought thoroughly about it. And number one, the grant money isn't guaranteed. Number two, by the time you add in the mobilization increase in costs and the annual increase in inflation costs, and then for a not guaranteed amount of money on the grant, we have a guaranteed amount of money that we'd be losing. So it probably almost washes out.
Well, so I say we still apply for those grants, so whether we get it or not is
Just for
still,
other
we're
projects,
making
right?
our best shot at getting the grant money.
Yeah.
But we're not holding up your whole project for 2 years in the hopes that you get it. And then, like she said, it's not a sure thing. You might not get that grant, and then you've waited 2 years and your cost escalated another 10%.
Okay, you guys ready for Jason? Hi, Jason.
Good evening. A couple of things. Hi, Bruce. Good
We want to
see
hear your full
Bruce
name,
again. Jason Birmingham with Lewis Young Robertson in Birmingham. In terms of the grant money, I don't know if the grant is conducive to this, but I know we've worked on similar projects where if grant monies did become available, these bonds or the financing certainly could be prepaid at any time. So, you know, if grant monies were to be able to infused into this project, I don't see any reason why you couldn't pay down the bonds. There wouldn't be any penalty associated with that. I don't know if that helps in terms of the discussion, but I see the flexibility that if you did seek grants and you got the grant monies, you certainly wouldn't have to keep the full amount of the financing outstanding. I think this evening, what I was prepared to kind of discuss, I know you've got a packet of information, but I think there have been several questions that have been asked of me. I talked to Brand a little bit today. I also had a chance to talk to Lisa. And I think there might be some misunderstanding of what the super parameters or the parameters resolution is and perhaps what it isn't. It certainly is not a binding obligation in terms of issuance of bonds. It does set the stage for the process to unfold and to go through a public process. And so you will note that there are some maximum parameters that are set within the resolution. It also requires a public hearing. So probably the most significant thing that is being done by virtue of that resolution is setting a public hearing. Now, a couple of questions. Does this, as a city council, would this bind us to have to issue bonds in any amount? And the answer to that is no. Parameters resolution would not bind the city council to have to issue any amount of bonds in order to finance this project. But it does provide an opportunity if you determine that bonding is the vehicle in which you want to pursue both phase 1 and phase 2. It would start the process so that you don't have to go back and start that process when you figure out in the future if that's something you want to consider. So I think that's one question that I've been asked, I think has come up a couple of times. And so I just wanted to be clear that that's still a decision that's ultimately made by the city council of whether or not you proceed forward with financing. I think the other question is, what are our limitations? And I think the way this resolution is written is it really only caps the maximum amount that can be issued. Anything lower than the amount, including zero, is an alternative that the city council could consider. I think timing is an issue. What we have set out in the calendar that I think was also provided in your packet was to follow the course of action that was necessary in order to have the public hearing. At the time, when we were visiting with Steve about it, he kind of gave us a similar time frame. He said the reality of this is we don't know exactly the final cost of all of this. Mm-hmm. And I says, well, you don't want to issue any financing until you have your arms around what the costs are. And then he told me, well, we anticipate maybe the middle of May, but we wouldn't be in a position until May 21st as a city council to even consider what the bids were and where we wanted to go with that. And so I said, well, we really pushed the closing beyond the 21st. You know, it could be the 23rd of May. It could even be further into June if that's the way you wanted to do it. The critical part in my mind is you don't want to enter into a financing before you really have an idea of what phase 1 and phase 2 might look like. You know, it sounds like phase 1 is going to be a very definitive cost to construct bid situation. It sounds like phase 2 might be more of a design build, basically, here's our budget, we need to fit this within these parameters. And we've worked on those types of projects as well. I think you can certainly structure it that way. So really the purpose tonight, I was just going to quickly introduce Aaron Wade. Aaron Wade is with the law firm of Gilmore and Bell. He's the bond counsel that's kind of worked on drafting some of the documents. I wasn't sure they were going to be here tonight, but you might, Aaron's father used to be in the community here, Blake Wade. He was a bond attorney. He used to live in Centerville. I don't think he lives there anymore, does he? Kaysville. He jumped the coop. Anyway, Aaron was here in case there were any questions regarding what does the parameters resolution really do, because I thought there might be some concerns relative to, well, wait a second, does this make it so we've got to issue bonds or we've got to do a financing? And I just wanted to make sure that we clarified that it doesn't, force the city to do that. But it does set out a process. And in order to meet the May 23rd deadline that we had on our calendar, I think Lisa pointed this out, that it's imperative that there's a couple of noticing periods that have to be hit with the Davis Clipper in order to meet that time frame. But there's really no necessity other than we wanted to push it beyond May 21st to give this council some opportunity to know a little better what the cost would be. So with that, I don't know if there's some other questions that I might be able to answer. I did include an analysis in your, I think Brant included the analysis in your packet where we looked at RAP tax and other options. I will speak to the point that Bruce brought up. I think one of the major concerns is the escalation of construction inflation. 10 or 12%, if that's all the increase that it was, that's pretty good. We're seeing most projects in the Wasatch Front even being 20, 25%. So, I guess relatively speaking, 10 or 12% maybe isn't too bad of an increase. But I think that's something that you need to, cautiously consider of whether or not phase 2 is important to get done or started on in this construction cycle. I think there is a fair amount of risk of what that cost is otherwise. So with that, I'm happy, as well as Aaron, to address any questions that the council might have, or if Brant had any other direction he'd like to give us as well.
I got a question for either you or Aaron. So I look at this schedule in the packet. It says City Council, April 2nd, City Council adopts bond resolution and authorizes sale of bonds, including delegation of authority, and sets dated May 7th for public hearing. So when you talk about this being a resolution that we're not necessarily bound by, is there some conflict in wording there when we're talking about starting the sale of bonds?
Yeah, I don't think there's a conflict. The construct of this is there's two ways of handling it. One is a more of a simple parameters resolution that would then come back ultimately at a later meeting to ratify or to adopt a final bond resolution. The construct that's used in this case, more typical, is what we call a super parameters resolution, but in essence delegates authority to, in this case, the mayor, or mayor pro tem and the city manager. But it's still driven by ultimately what you collectively decide of whether or not you're going to bond finance. There's no way that I can't think of a circumstance where the mayor or a city manager or collectively both decide, well, our city council really decides we don't want to go forward and move and issue bonds. I've never seen a case where they've said, well, we've got delegated authority, so we're going to go ahead and issue bonds anyway. So I guess that's a risk. I've not ever seen that to be a significant risk, but that's the way it's contemplated right now. Again, I'll let Aaron maybe address this, but I don't believe that it forces any issuance, but for driven and directed by staff, council, collectively coming together and saying, you know what, let's bond X amount to get phase 1 and phase 2 done. But it does allow for flexibility so it doesn't have to come back to another meeting as long as we're within the parameters. And that's really the idea of delegated authority. I don't know if you want to speak to that, Aaron, or?
Yeah. So just along those same lines, Jason had mentioned, you know, in the resolution it sets forth that the mayor pro tem, and city manager can approve the final terms as long as they're within the parameters. So, you know, you might decide you're bonding for $800,000 instead of the full 1.6 or whatever. It allows that flexibility, but they couldn't come and say, well, we're going to do a $3 million bond. The other protection that you have, so along the same lines of this is non-binding, is paragraph 12, section 12 of the resolution itself says that the city basically reserves the right to not issue bonds for any reason at all. You know, it doesn't limit why you wouldn't issue bonds. You can do it for any reason at all. The other protection that you have is in issuing bonds is it's not like just the mayor and city council say, we want to do this. They sign one line and the bonds are issued. There's still a process. You know, Gilmore Bell, as the bond counsel, issues opinion that the bonds are a valid obligation. The city attorney is going to have an opinion saying that the bonds are a valid obligation and that the proper processes and procedures have been followed. So there are a lot of checks in place to make sure that, you know, that you couldn't have a runaway bond process here.
Not that you would,
right?
But
So Aaron, I've seen some bond documents with blank amounts for amount of the bond and interest rate on it. Is that because of the fact that you can go up to a certain amount and it's left empty because you haven't determined the amount yet? I come from a father with a legal background, so I don't like contracts that aren't full when I look at them. So
how we reference it in the parameters resolutions, we say.
We've got one council member who's listening by phone and watching by YouTube, so thank you.
Sorry about that. So what the parameters resolution does is it refers to it as like a form of a document. So it's not saying this is your final master resolution. This is saying in substantially the form that the master resolution is going to be in. And then as you decide the final terms of the bond, you know, with your financial advisor, market conditions, et cetera, then you fill in that information, and then that's what is approved by the designated officers being set in the parameters resolution, if that addresses the question.
yeah,
And being a little bit behind on the body language, so what I'm hearing then is you're saying that the master resolution is effectively just a generic boilerplate at this point, because I was noticing in there, such as page 11, there's a provision about issuing additional bonds, which says reference source not found and a few things like that. And then, of course, the sinking fund dates, none of those are put in there. So you're saying that if we were to approve a parameters resolution, we can come back at a later point and then vote on the master resolution with updated terms?
Well, I would suggest if that's the direction that you want to go, then I think we should change this from a super parameters resolution and just have it as a parameters resolution and have an additional meeting where you approve the final bond resolution, where you'd have the final interest rate, the final terms, and so forth. Now, one of the issues with that is just the flexibility of timing of pricing the bonds, et cetera, and the contestability, I guess, ultimately of if someone were to challenge the bond. There's some nuance relative to, because you're taking another action, let's say it's May 21st, in concert with adopting the maybe the bids, you also adopt a final bond resolution. There's also some contestability challenge with that also could push off the closing, which then makes bond holders apprehensive to close on for a period of time. So I don't know if you want to address that too, Aaron. You might have a.
Yeah, I think what Jason said is right. I mean, I think there's a lot of protection built in here. You know, you're still going to have, granted, the city council, if that's the direction you want to go, that's no problem. It does just introduce an additional step that has to take place that, as Jason mentioned, could harm the timing of the bonds. But there is the protections in place where, you know, the attorney is going to review the final terms, the city attorney, city manager is going to sign off, the mayor is going to sign off. those sorts of things. So we will get a final that is going to be approved by the officers of the city. But if the preference was to do a second resolution to approve final terms, then we could accommodate that.
Is that what you were saying, George? I don't know if I heard that in your question.
Well, basically, yeah, I was pointing out that you've got your parameters resolution, and then you have a master resolution, which is it's a boilerplate that has a bunch of to be determined in it. And I just wanted to make sure that if we were to enact parameters resolution, that doesn't leave the council without the ability to approve the master resolution, because all the terms and conditions and dates with financial obligations really go in there. So that's where I was trying to go on that.
Yeah, and I think Aaron spoke to that, and I hopefully I spoke to that as well. I think there's two ways of approaching it. One is this way, which is a super parameters resolution. This is how the city has done other bonds. This is how you've done water bonds in the past, storm drainage bonds, how you did the municipal building, was just through a super parameters resolution where it gave designated officers the ability, as long as it was within the parameters. So I think what George is saying is absolutely correct. Most of the blanks, however, are relative to the maximum parameters. It's the par amount of bonds. It's the maximum length in which the bonds can be maturing or paid over time. It's the maximum coupon rate, or the interest rate can't be over 3%. So those are the maximum parameters, which in it's saying mayor or mayor pro tem and the city manager, ultimately, as long as it's within those parameters, could, as designated officers, then enter into that. Now, again, I've never seen where they don't
check with us
straw
first.
poll, check with you, and say, here's the deal terms. This is what we're thinking of going with, and kind of a straw poll, and everyone say, yeah, is it within the parameters? Does it look good? Oh, okay.
And it is fascinating to hear your report as to the reasons to use the designated officers rather than come back for another meeting, especially if the timing is too close to the accepting of the bid. So I've learned something new tonight.
Yeah,
That was interesting.
yeah. Pricing is concerning sometimes. Sometimes there's contestability challenges from when the 30 days actually starts, and sometimes when another council action is taken, there is some interpretation that is another definitive legislative action, so it postpones it another 30 days.
Right.
Well, if we continue to do that,
we don't want to do
we
that.
can postpone it inevitably.
So my remaining question is, in deciding between the two amounts, I think it makes more sense to give us more flexibility, because we end up determining the amount that we want to borrow anyway. But how is it that we are getting the rates if we have not finalized our decision about the amount that we're borrowing?
So what we discussed was sending out a solicitation, so basically through a red herring or an offering statement, offering document. It would be a limited circulation just to accredited or educated investors. That investor pool would give us an indication of up to that maximum amount, recognizing that they would be bidding on anything up to $1.6 million. Now, they could have nothing. They could get the bids, and just like the contractor, you could say, hey, depending on what we get back, we may not select any of them.
Right.
We will have the right by the city in that offering document to select any or none of the bids. And so I would suggest then that they would in essence be on notice that it's up to the $1.6 million, but it could be something less than that. Now, we might have some qualifying bidders that would say, if it's not over $1 million, then we don't want to consider our bid. Okay, so we would have to weigh that option.
And maybe tonight we could determine our low end and communicate that as well, right? Because if we don't determine that, it puts us at risk of them giving themselves a higher amount of cushion.
Yes,
correct or
I
incorrect?
I think that's fair. My biggest concern, I think, after having the discussion is, what are you going to do with phase 2? Are you really committed to doing something with phase 2?
Yeah.
And it sounds like potentially one of your options, which sounds like a good option, is phase one will be a hard bid. You'll know the dollars that you need for the gap there. Phase two, you won't necessarily know. But the idea is to set parameters or a budget so that you're in essence design building phase two. Now you might want to add other amenities to this after the fact that go above and beyond that, which certainly happens all the time in projects, especially these types of projects where amenities are added at later times. But I think it provides that flexibility. But it is helpful for us to know, well, what are some of those parameters, you know?
What I would recommend for the council to recommend that we intend to move forward as discussed and get the hard bid for the phase one and the options for the phase two, to instruct the design contractor to complete the design, and then give both the low end and the high end of the range for this. If we determine the high end, what would normally be the process of speculating about the low end to protect ourselves from losing out on the lowest rate that we might possibly get?
Well, you know, I think we're talking about somewhere between $1 million and $1.6 million. I think bidders are going to understand that any and all bids might be refused. You might be in a circumstance, I mean, they're going to know by virtue of the package that we send out that you're designing, that you're bidding, that you're determining what the costs are. So they're going to have plenty advance notice to know that there's a possibility that the city might fully move forward because you're ready to do it. They might also know, you know what, we're not ready to go. We might only want to do phase one at this point and put phase two completely on hold. So I think in terms of if we're really going to go through the process, I think between $1 million and $1.6 million makes sense. But to me, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't have the ability to go lower.
Right.
It would just give us a good framework in which to solicit, you know,
Right.
interest.
I mean, in your red herring, in your fishing expedition, putting the numbers out, I just wondered if that is a normal part of the process, is to give the low end and the high end. Because in what I'm seeing here, we're only talking about stating the high end.
It is very common, and it's because they're spending time coming up with a proposal, coming up with something that they think is valuable and they hope merits award.
Sure.
Now, if it's between 0, which is a risk, and 1.6 million, I think that's inherent to any of this.
Okay.
I think they know that it might be nothing. They may not even be selected because there's going to be multiple bidders. 2, we fully disclose that we don't know exactly what the timing, well, we know the timing, but we're not sure if the bidding is going to come in where it needs to be in order for the project to move forward. So we give them a comfort level that if we're really going to go through with it, our intent isn't that we're going to come in with 200,000.
Right.
Our intent is that we're going to go over the $1 million to do both phase one and phase two. I think at the time, if you determine bids come back, the thought process is, you know, let's not go to phase two. Let's just do the first phase of this. I think there may be another solution. We maybe look for a different solution that's more streamlined, more cost effective, maybe the real property lease, but we almost do it more of a short term.
Yeah.
That could be maybe taken out longer with an additional phase two if you decide to do it. Right. So that's where I'm saying let's create flexibility. This still creates the flexibility, but you know, I just don't want to get further behind a timeline because there is a process that you have to go through in order to even use this mechanism. And so we're hoping to get that clock started.
So we need to talk as a council about which number we want to propose.
Yep. We've tried to provide you with Bruce to tell you more about phase two. Gave you Jason and Aaron to talk about the bond. So yeah, need to.
Lisa, do you have any advice for us as far as this is going? Do you have anything you think we need to be considering?
Initially, I was concerned about the bond and whether we needed to go that route, but I have had the opportunity to review most of the documents and had a good conversation with Jason Birmingham. You know, my main concern was we don't know the costs of phase 2, so why are we going out to get money when we don't know? But I think as we've talked tonight, we're trying to build in that flexibility to, you know, keep our options open. And so I don't think I would go quite as strong as Councilmember Fillmore saying, hey, you know, remember, we're staying flexible. Let's, you know, get a commitment for this. But I think the difficult decisions are still to come. So tonight is keeping our options open.
Yeah, I kind of feel that same way.
And I was just trying to understand the process better, and so it sounds like it's pretty standard operating procedure to just put the top number.
Right,
which is great. I mean,
to me that gives you the flexibility,
yeah.
But I can see the other side of, you know, wanting to get more bidders or more security in that, and I would probably, you know, lean towards Jason's expertise on that,
yeah.
What they're going to look for, but.
Yeah, we have, you know, as we mentioned last time, we've had, you know, a handful, 4, 5, 6 prospective purchasers who have indicated a strong interest. So we would anticipate, our timeline, I think, anticipated, excuse me, distributing that somewhere around the 19th of April, so later in the month of April, and then those bids coming in around the first part of May. I think it's May 3rd. Again, they're all conditional upon the city moving forward, but I think by the first part of May, we'd have a good idea of what the options are.
But they just give you a set interest rate, and it is written in that that's within the 0 to the 1.6.
Right, and typically what we'll get from them will be a term sheet with a credit credit commitment. So basically, it's gone through their underwriting, their credit commitment. And we're specifying exactly what the structure looks like. The very initial discussions, really it was just, what if we wanted to borrow over 7 years, almost like it's straight level debt service. And I know Brent had a follow-up with, it's interesting because our RAP tax has some other obligations. You know, we have the South Davis Rec Center obligation that we're paying, and so we're building the debt around that. But it will be specific to that structure. It will be specific to interest rate and any other costs that they might see that they need as part of this, whether they need an attorney to review it, and they also will probably give us a timeline of which, as long as we close by a certain date, they won't revisit the interest rate. And most of them will give us at least 30 days. Some will even give us a 60-day maybe lock provision of what the interest rate is. But I anticipate by May 3rd, May 6th, that time frame, that we'll know exactly what options we have on the table. And
it just fascinates me that there's such a wide range, and that they're not presenting like a sliding scale or something. And so then it just makes me wonder if there's quite a lot of cushion built in. So that was the point of my question.
My thought is there always is a lot of cushion in lenders' perspectives, and you know, it a lot of times depends on their appetite at the time.
Yeah.
A lot of times it depends on the type of project. I mean, there's a lot of factors, but you know, they do have to be market. So there are other municipal bonds that are trading, even on the public market side, as well as private placement. So there are other secondary market deals that you have to be in the ballpark. Yeah. So it's not that, well, we just pick whatever we want because there's no market. There is a market,
sure.
You know.
Great, thank you.
So you feel all right that we're okay to do this without any risk?
Well, I don't think you can eliminate risk completely.
No, it's really a policy decision of, you know, prioritizing the parks, prioritizing the use of the RAP tax, and prioritizing, you know, borrowing and debt.
Yeah.
But it's more of a policy decision, you know, in comparing this with the lease purchase, which I also think is a good option. But this one does, although it has the timeframes, I also see the benefit in having the timeframes and the appeal process, and there's a set statutory framework for this. But the lease purchase could also be an option if you're going to borrow less money than the bonding.
Well, and as long as this doesn't put us behind, and that was what I was concerned about, is it if it put us behind the schedule, the designer's schedule, then what harm is there in having all the options on the table, right?
Yes, and I guess if you're saying the risk, it's not a binding resolution, so
Right.
Yes, we can get out of that.
So what
And
we're
that's
doing
what I'm
tonight
saying.
is
We're
zero
trying to
risk.
keep our options open while because I think we still need to see the numbers on phase 2 or the priorities of your park and the use of your RAP tax, but this keeps the option open while we're getting that information and also getting the bids.
Yeah. So considering that thought and keeping options as open as possible, I would suggest that we approve the parameters resolution at 1.6 ceiling amount to initiate the process for issuing bonds.
I'll go ahead and second that motion.
We have a motion, we have a motion and a second. Further discussion?
I do want to add one point, and this is something that we need to look at as we go along. The parameters resolution will be at 1.6, but you are in control of your bond issuance. So, as I understand it, we can issue bonds, but we are not required to issue all the way up to the 1.6 based on the proposals we received. Is that correct?
They're nodding their heads affirmative.
Yes.
They both said yes, Councilman McEwen.
Well, and I very much appreciated our process and the information we got back last time with our extremely conservative projections. And so then we just have to match that, which would be our goal, is to stay that conservative with the bids that come back and then make decisions once we have all of that information, so.
Yeah, and I think the way you're approaching phase 2 is a good way to approach it. If what your concern is we want to really use our dollars wisely, and our dollars are our RAP tax dollars, but you want to get something done with phase 2, it seems like you're really saying, well, this is my budget. This is what I can do in phase 2. And you might not get everything you want in that park in phase 2. It might come in a future phase, but at least it's probably back to Lisa's point, which is if that's your priority for RAP tax is this park, then it seems like you're approaching it the right way. Unless you're going to use the RAP tax another way and not do phase 2, then we probably need to have the discussion of, well, how else should we use it? Now, in terms of monetizing it based on construction inflation and low cost of money, I would say I'd borrow the money anyway. Whatever your priority is, because I think it's better than the cost of inflation. And had you done this 3 years ago, when you first started it, you probably would have saved not only the, construction inflation that's happened since then, but you probably get more actual projects done for that same dollar amount that now we're just we're paying for construction inflation, which is a risk that, is there.
And also finishing up a master planning process, so we know,
Yes.
so we can find out where the citizens want
Yeah.
us to spend the money. So.
Yeah, no, good thoughts.
Well, I'm hoping for a recession so contractors get hungry again and
Hey,
give
let's
us
hope.
a better bid.
Let's hope.
Pros and cons to everything.
That's right. I'm one that hates to have all the cards on the table, but it was pointed out to me that we still have an open bid process for phase 2. So they won't know, hey, there's this much money that they have, so we're going to stick them for this much money. I mean, it is an open bid process for for phase 2 and you know, what amount we may get there, so. Any further discussion before we take a vote on this?
I didn't understand what your last comment was. What do you mean an open bid process?
Well, on phase 2, right, Bruce, aren't we going, we will be able to tie down that amount, correct? Of what's done in phase 2, or is that not correct?
Well, you could choose to not do, like, you could, a la carte, you could choose to not do anything, or to choose to do your priorities, or to choose to do more, depending on how much money you have and how much the different amenities are going to cost.
And whatever we choose to do within that, though, we have more than one provider that would give us a bid on that.
Yes,
is that correct?
A competitive bid. Maybe that's what the word you're
I'm sorry,
yeah.
competitive bid.
Competitive bid. In that, there's going to be a competition amongst contractors to get this project. You bet.
That's what I meant to say.
But unless we really know what's going in phase 2, you're not going to have a specific bid. You're just going to have a cost per.
Yeah, unit
and
cost.
hopefully you're getting apples to apples. But if you want something different in phase 2, you don't have a cost estimate in your bid. So.
And the more complete we can make that list that we're picking and choosing from, that a la carte list, then the better off we are, because the risk is when you're doing a change order and adding something. But if we're communicating, we're likely going to do this additional work, so tell us what it would cost if we optioned for it.
And G. Brown Design, they feel that they can have some really good estimates ready before you actually open your bids for your phase 1. That they'll have their estimates all done, and they anticipate having their complete designs done first part of June, so they can have those in the hands of the contractor before they really even start. They'll still be working through demolition and things before they even start the construction process. So.
Yeah.
I was just curious too, is it possible in phase 2 to bid it out in different schedules? I guess what I'm suggesting is if the city were to prioritize, you know, and basically say, well, this is our base need. If we really can't get this out of phase 2, then maybe we should not consider it, but you could bid that out as phase 2, and then you could have an add-on Schedule A, Schedule B, Schedule C for some of the other amenities, and see whether or not you can even fit within any of those parameters.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Every bid I've been involved in has alternates that they give you a bid on it if you choose to do it, and then depending on whether you have the money or you like that, it's an alternate that they either add in or take out.
All right, if no other questions, we're ready to vote? Okay. Councilman Ince.
Aye.
Aye.
Short. Nay.
Aye.
That motion passes 4-1. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good night.
Good night.
And Aaron, it's good to see you again. 15 years ago, I used to coach him in basketball, you know. Amazing. He was a great point guard. Hopefully he's a better attorney, though. Thank you. Thanks, Jason. Right, item 5. This is the CDBG project regarding ADA ramps. And were we going to have somebody from a department head here to talk about this?
Mr. Mayor, I don't see Randy or Mark. I just tried to text Randy, but I know he doesn't text, so I'm not quite sure if he saw that. So,
is this something we can discuss, Brand? Do we have enough through the information you provided? And
absolutely.
And have you talked, or do you want to address it, or?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to talk about it. This is a project that I've reviewed the agreement. In case you didn't know, one of my primary responsibilities in Yuma was actually overseeing the community development block grant funding. We were entitled to a community of $1 million a year. So I'm very familiar with this process and how it works. So where Davis County was is you need to spend down 1.5 times your entitlement. So for example, if you have $1 million entitlement, you need to have less than 1.5 million when it comes to the end of the year, which the end of the year is approaching. So the county needs to quickly spend down some funds because they had projects that fell through. So they had some funds available. 130,000 or so went to Bountiful for a senior citizen center. But we asked for 60,000. They awarded us 40,000 to do some ADA ramps in a community between, oh, good heavens, is it? I can't remember is it 4th East and 4th West, Parish Lane and Pages, I believe is the area. Is that right, Mackenzie? So words came back. The low bid was with Acme at 43,900. So it's just slightly above what we'll receive from CDBG. We can easily cover those costs through our transportation funding, that difference of 3,900. Great thing about CDBG, there really is no cost match or anything like that. They do have some pretty strict requirements and how you spend the money. It is Davis-Bacon. If you don't know what that is, I'm happy to explain. But these will, if you look through the bid, there should be in the bid packet. Did we include this as far as 1,000 square feet of removal and replace 10 ped ramps, 500 square feet of remove and replace sidewalk, 500 square feet remove and replace road base, and there's a few other items. So about 10 ped ramps is actually what we're looking at. So the agreement, we reviewed the agreement. The agreement is, I don't know if Lisa, if you have any questions or comments about the agreement. It's pretty typical of an agreement. Not really much you could change. HUD kind of dictates what goes in the agreement. So.
Yeah, I don't have any changes.
Okay. What's that, Lisa?
I don't have any changes.
Okay. All right.
I'm happy to address any questions if you have any.
Any questions? Everybody good with it? Do we have a motion on it then to approve an agreement for the CDBG funding to construct the ADA ramps?
So moved.
Second.
Councilwoman Meekum?
Aye.
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 That motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Mayor's report. Wonderful. So, happenings of the past couple weeks. Some of us, many of us had a chance to attend the 100th dinner.
Do we need to also award the bid?
Oh, shoot. Thank you. We do, don't we?
That's what I was just asking Jay, because we do need to award the bid. The agreement's great, but.
Okay.
So I move that we award the bid for construction as reported in the staff report.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call vote. Councilwoman Ivy?
Aye.
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 So that the bid award is passed also 5-0. Thank you for catching me, Councilwoman Fillmore. So it's good to have that help. Mayor's report. 2 weeks ago we had the Episcopal dinner, which was a success. 100th dinner served. That's quite the record.
100? 250.
It's the 100th time that
Oh,
they've done
100th
it.
dinner.
They served 250 people.
Beg your pardon, I missed it.
Yes. So that's over 8 years, and it's a great event in the community, and we have many of our citizens that get involved and serve, and I was able to stop by that, and that's a great activity. That, as a reminder, happens, as I mentioned in my mayor's report, in the quarterly newsletter every third Wednesday. And so there'll be another one coming up on April 17th. One of our residents who lives up on the hill, I know we have lots of residents, but this particular residence had been people used their property a lot. The Haddads, George Haddad passed away. I had a chance to attend his service, and the family's grateful for all that the city does, especially for the police force and all the help that they give up there, because they are in an area such that people don't realize they're on private land, and the Haddads are very patient with people, but they're appreciative for the support that they receive. And we're appreciative of all our residents, obviously, and we're mindful of anyone that's lost a loved one. But and then as far as appointments go, I have interviews set up for a couple people for planning commissioner, And we are getting close. We have 2 to fill on the Whitaker, 1 to fill on Planning Commission. I have filled the trails. I have filled the tree board. I've filled the Parks and Rec. The big struggle I'm having is with Landmarks Commission. I need, and part of that is education, helping people to know what do there, and any help you may give me and people that may have interest in that regards, and I would appreciate it. But that's my mayor's report for tonight. So, city manager's report, planning commission update, or anything else?
So I must confess I'm a little behind on what my responsibilities are. I'm not prepared to discuss the planning commission update, but I will say that I wouldn't mind actually having community development here to present that to you in future council. I know that's critical for you to hear what's going on with the planning commission. So hopefully that Corey will be open to that change. But if not, I'm happy to still present on it. As of right now, I'm not 100% behind, up to date on what's going on with planning commission, but it won't happen again.
I think they did have a discussion of the Main Street, talked about that in the work session. And then they also had some training without me, on legislative and administrative decisions. So it was a pretty short meeting.
Great. Thanks for that, Lisa. I appreciate you backing me up on that. But I just wanted to say I'm happy to be here, work with this council and the great staff, and represent the residents and businesses of this community. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To have you.
If I could, Brent, I actually have some good news for the council. Last Wednesday, I went to the Wasatch Front Regional Council meeting. It's the meeting where we decide, we prioritize the funding for the grants. It's the CMAC grant. We applied for the parish and the Marketplace Drive. That passed. We're going to be getting the funding for that. It's programmed for 5 to 6 years out. So good news.
1.4 million.
Yeah, a total of 1.4 million.
Was that Marketplace or Fourth West? I thought we
Marketplace.
said
Fourth West was approved 2 years ago. So we got the funding for
we
that
have
2 years.
both.
So we have both. So we're going to
Now.
be talking with the Wasatch Front, see if we can create some synergy there
good.
with the 2 of them. But it does go to one more committee, but it was the number 1 priority, and it was unanimous that should be funded.
Oh
in
yeah.
the meeting. So I'm
Somebody
pretty
must
confident
have
they'll
driven it.
The COG will hear about it next.
Looking forward to that. Oh, and I guess I should bring up as well too that the third quarter sales tax that the county commissioners approved. Sorry, Jake, did we finish?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. I thought you were, but I didn't want to interrupt if you weren't. The third quarter that the county commissioners approved, that will be coming to COG. This is for new construction, not repair and maintenance on the highways throughout Davis County. And so I would appreciate from any of you, any residents of new construction, that as we discuss as COGS members of what that money is going to be used for, that we in our upcoming meetings, suggestions that they will be entertaining, then we'll be voting on what that will go for. So I forgot I'd had a COG meeting during that time. It was the same night as the Episcopal dinner, and so I was late to the dinner. So I thought I'd better stay for that discussion.
So is there something, when you talk new construction, to the best of my knowledge, the primary new construction item that we have is the extension of 1250 West into Farmington. Is there something that we should be doing to politic for that?
Probably should be getting from, I think that Randy's been working closely on with the owners of the land and what stage we're at as far as, I know I met one of the owners of the land at a meeting that I was at, as far as what stage we're at that.
But when I say politics, should we be trying to put pressure on the commissioners of how significant that issue is, or is it sufficiently under control that we don't need to worry about it?
I think it's a good idea, and I think with Mayor Talbot from Farmington, I should probably get with him, and I think their part of the road, they have probably a little bit to do widening, but quite of theirs is bit of pay, but there's some county there and some city there and he says it's, you know, a priority to them. I think it's more of a priority to us, but.
Mayor Cutler was very involved in politicking for that and keeping that on the forefront of people's minds and talking about different funding options, keeping it on UDOT's radar. So I think you've hit the nail on the head that it's extraordinarily important for us to keep that discussion alive.
Thank you, Councilman Ince.
Are there other, and maybe we should be asking Randy, are there other things that we ought to try and get on their radar list as things that we would like to have done in the way of new roads?
Could we make an assignment for somebody to ask Randy on that?
Sure, I will.
Okay.
Or Brant can.
I'm happy to do so.
I like to tell 1250 West one a lot, though, you know, but I do like inquiring about others, but, that's a great point.
Once you build a new road, though, then you have to pay to maintain it for a lot of years. So new roads isn't always a good goal unless it's absolutely needed.
Good point.
Yep. Any of you with any of your committees have anything that we need to know that you're over? If there's anything on the front burner?
I would take 30 seconds, if possible, to highlight the fact that April 18th is the Great Utah Shakeout. That is a statewide and actually multi-state activity date to try and get people to prepare themselves for and understand the ramifications of earthquakes in our lives. 2 days later, on Saturday, we have a city drill, which will encompass the entire city. Both dates, the Emergency Operations Center will be activated downstairs. There will be communications from the various quadrants of the city into the Emergency Operations Center and then onto the county and onto the state. We would request every homeowner, business, whatever, to register online for participation in the shakeout. State numbers hit their high, as I recall, about 4 or 5 years ago at 1.4 million registrations. They were under 1 million last year, as I recall.
You'll have more this year.
Yeah,
Earthquakes. Right on the top of
there
Facebook.
There is more interest, but it is important, and it's all of the schools will be participating. It is an important activity.
I agree.
Thank you. Yeah, very important. Thanks for your help with that.
I'll give you an update on when we had the work session about Island View. I had told you the temperature that I had gotten from the rec district about postponing payments, but then we actually had our board meeting shortly after that. Staff's recommendation, the finance staff's recommendation would be to probably increase the interest rate a little bit. The board suggested the idea of giving them more years of priority use if we were to ask for a delay. And the words that the conversation ended on were, give us an offer. So if we find that we want to explore that option, it wouldn't just be a free pass to pay later, but that they would entertain ideas of what they could get in exchange for a delayed payment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Did you get any kind of a feel for what someone might consider appropriate? A 1-year extension, would that be considered appropriate?
Yeah, maybe a 1-year extension or 1 or 2 years per year delay in payment, something like that was the impression I left with.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
I had a couple of things at our most recent museum meeting. 6 years ago, when I first got on the council, I used to listen to Councilman Wright expressed frustration that the museum did not have a reliable telephone. And that is still the case. And that's extremely frustrating when people try to call to the museum to make appointments to bring a large group and they can't get through, or when there are people there as docents and they don't have the ability to reliably to call out. That's a problem. There's also not reliable Wi-Fi, and the security cameras that we approved a long time ago, it seems to me, are still not installed. So what do I need to do to expedite that?
I'm on it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's all for now.
I thought we were maybe using Pony Express. Since it was, Whitaker
I felt like
was
it. Well,
doing
actually,
calls.
we're leaning on the director's personal cell phone, and that's really not very kosher. So.
Thanks, Brent. Thanks, Stephanie, or Councilman Marty. Did you have something, Councilman?
I think you guys know what my committee's after.
Councilman McEwen, anything?
The mosquitoes are already out, that I can tell you. Spraying will begin shortly. Yeah, so
Okay.
minus the regular Centerville summer coming up.
Thanks. I don't know that there's a reason for closed meetings, so if not, I will exercise a motion. I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Good start,
Council
Brant.
closed.
Keep up the good work.
Ever. Good job.